Hey gang, I just got done reading all of your discussion posts for the two stories that we read together, and I gotta say, they were great. They were great. I'm really impressed by the thoughts that you're having and the way that you're communicating those in writing. So, super excited to keep on reading with you, though this may be preaching to the choir because I don't know if these people will see this, but 13 students in this course chose not to post anything at all. So that's 10 points lost. And then in the discussion one, 6 students chose not to get 10 points for merely introducing themselves. So I know it can be difficult staying engaged with online courses. I have similar problems myself. It's one of the reasons I'm posting these videos so that you can get to know me and I can feel like I'm talking to you in some way. So, make sure you're getting these things done. And the things only get more complicated as we go through the course. So take these early opportunities to practice these skills. So I commented on every single one of the posts, and my comments are, I'm trying to obviously be encouraging in ways that, sorry, someone just texted me. I'm trying to be encouraging and honestly assess what you're doing, but then also trying to push you toward getting better at this, which often has to do with different kinds of strategies of reading or looking at different kinds of specificities in the text. So just keep that in mind. You don't always have to answer questions that I ask you on your discussion posts. I won't always be able to return and, comment on every single one anyways, but those are questions that, you could take forward when we get to the midterm, when we get to the final, and just in general, getting better at literary analysis. So lots of you are pointing out great things that I wanted to illustrate by choosing these two stories. So let me first tell you the things that I was thinking when I first chose these stories. We're talking about the umbrella genre of speculative fiction, which is a fairly recent coinage in literary studies. And as I said in the first video, it is a phrase that is trying to, I think, grapple with or understand the ways in which genres of fantasy and science fiction aren't really discrete anymore. Discrete, ETE, means separate, divided, separate things. And lots of authors, Ken Liu being a great example, are using the techniques or workings of those genres to make a new kind of thing, right? So I chose two stories from Liu that I thought partook of still the older notions of genre. So many of you pointed out, which I think was right, the ways in which in the Paper Menagerie magic was a thing, right? There's no explanation for the ability of his mother to breathe life into these folded paper animals, right? We're not asked to think about it logically in any way. It's just magic. Whereas the simulacrum, in that partakes of a thing that the science fiction genre does, which is extrapolation, okay? Science fiction as a genre extrapolates from current technologies often, current situations of varying degrees, which we'll see, and imagines a future. But this future can step by step be extrapolated from present technologies. So the simulacrum, you can see, right? I mean, I'm posting a video of me talking to you in an online course, which, I graduated high school in 1992. This kind of simulacral reality that we're experiencing here was not possible in 1992. But it was, let me say it wasn't present in 1992, but it was possible if you extrapolate from technologies that were being developed, like the internet, obviously. So magic in fantasy or creating things out of thin air, let's say, or extrapolating from current technologies. Those are two things that historically or traditionally these genres have had that are different. But we see these coming together in many, many texts. We'll see some of this for sure in the novels that we read. And I'm using these short stories to sort of prepare you for the longer readings when things get a little more complex there. But many of you pointed this out. Osman used the phrase old world magic, and I like that phrase because it kind of points out a temporality where these things are more traditional or old-fashioned, whereas simulacrum is clearly a futuristic thing. Sean pointed out the temporality as important in these stories, and I think that's a good point. Sean said that the Paper Menagerie seems to take place in our own time, and simulacrum was clearly a future. When we get to the novels, you'll see Babel is clearly set in a past. Chain Gang All-Stars is clearly set in a future. I think that the temporal matters of the text can really lead to different kinds of insights there. Now, another thing, I'm looking at the notes here I made of things that you pointed out. Willie pointed out that the simulacrum poses philosophical questions. And I think that that's right. I think both fantasy and science fiction can point to philosophical questions, but science fiction seems to deal with the philosophical questions that are historically grounded. So concerns that come out of current technologies and ask us about, say, what it means to be human, or what is the line between humanity and, say, artificial intelligence. Things like this kind of philosophical notions that are historically grounded. Someone else put it in terms of, I'm trying to see where it is in my notes. I can't remember who said this, but I thought it was really insightful. And also another way to think about philosophy. This student said that it was Jadelyn, said that the issue in simulacrum was ethical, which I think is another good point, that the ethics and philosophical concern of simulacrum, I think, is an important insight on that text. Let's see. Okay, so another thing just to think about as we move through is fantasy, I think, lends itself more toward allegory, okay? An allegory is a story in which the things in the story are symbolic of other things, okay? They stand in as metaphors for something. If you think about this, I read the Bible as a child, and the lessons that Jesus Christ teaches in the New Testament are parables, right? He talks about a mustard seed. I don't remember all of these things. It's been a while. But the mustard seed as a metaphor for one's faith, and how it can grow in different kinds of rocky terrain or fertile ground. I don't remember it exactly, but Christian theologians would call that a parable. Parable means that the things in the story don't stand just for those things, but are metaphors for other things. So some of you pointed this out, which I think was wise. Jadelyn's certainly one of them. That the animals, or the magic that the mother is able to breathe into the animals, is symbolic of her culture, the culture that she comes from. It's symbolic of the past, right? Because it is, a tradition that comes from her village. And it's not extrapolated from some technological thing. It's just an element of the story, a fantastical, magical element of the story. So when we see something like that in a story that isn't extrapolated from current realities, I think our minds are called to turn to what do they stand for? What is it a metaphor for? Okay? So as we move through the course, look for when things are symbolic, when things become symbols of other things, or when things are metaphors for other things, okay? So for instance, the tiger, and the boy was born in the year of the tiger. We get little clues that that these things are metaphorical or symbolic. Whereas the simulacrum, the projector technology that the father invents there, it's certainly resonant, let's say, of the relationship between the daughter and the father, but it is a reality in the text. It is an extrapolated technology in the text. I think that text makes us want to ask about the ethical or philosophical concerns of those kinds of technologies in our lives right now, more than it wants us to think of that as a symbol for something else, right? Okay, now having said that, it certainly is some sort of metaphor for the failure of the father and daughter to have a relationship. That is something that we can talk about. And I don't mean to suggest that these genres always have absolute distinctions like this. In fact, my point is quite the opposite of that. But those things still obtain. Fantasy always leads itself more toward allegory, as traditionally conceived, and science fiction leads more toward ethical and philosophical critiques of the present by representing an extrapolated future. Okay? That's the main point I wanted to make with these texts. And you all came up with really, really great things. Lots of things I didn't even think of. I believe it was Lauren that noted the role of the father in the Paper Menagerie. I think she was the only student, or they were the only student that made this point. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because I didn't think of the father, this guy that has a mail order bride, and the sort of critique of contemporary capitalism or economics that would even lead to something, a situation like that. The mother being in an absolutely economic destitute situation where she would have to consider something like that. And then the father's role of not trying to build a bridge, or not truly respecting where she's from, and how that played out in her relationship with the son. I thought that was a really good a good insight there. So let me point out a few things that you all pointed out that I think that are important aspects of texts that we need to pay attention to moving forward. Okay? So one thing that many of you mentioned was themes. To read a work thematically, right? Some of the themes you pointed out, Laurel pointed out a theme of grief. Anna pointed out a theme of generational sins. Joseph pointed out innocence versus guilt. I think these are really important things. So to think of these texts that we read thematically, what is a theme that carries out throughout these? Okay, that's a good thing. Now, the other thing that I've been talking about here that many of you mentioned is the idea of genre itself. How can genre, or things that we know about these different genres, lead us to insights in the text? Lance had a discussion post. The title was Connected Fantasy and Disconnected Technology. I thought that was a great title and a great kind of indication of how genre itself can lead to certain insights, okay? And I think just from the title, we can see what Lance means by that, but definitely go read his posts. Okay, the other thing, Joseph mentioned this, Anna mentioned this, is perspective, or point of view, or POV, as we call it in literary analysis. So, Simulacrum had several subjective points of view, right? In these communiques, each character speaking in that way, whereas the Paper Menagerie was from the point of view of the son. Many of us really had this empathetic reaction to him having another woman read his mom's original language, and then him writing the word for love again and again as a sort of way to connect with that. But being inside his perspective, I think really led to the emotional payoff of that story. So theme, genre, point of view. Also, I mentioned allegorical readings where things are symbolic, or where we have metaphors standing in for other things. So I'll keep adding to these this sort of list of terms of literary analysis as we go through. So make notes of these on these videos. Maybe I'll type them out too. I don't know. I'm just going to see how this goes and see how this strikes you. So the last thing I'll say is about this is some of my comments on your posts were about trying to look at things from the opposite end of the claim that you've made. For me, I think one of the best things about the genre of what we can call now speculative fiction is that very often and interestingly, instead of making a hard truth claim, like this is right, this is wrong, I think the genre very often presents contradictions, okay? So if it's trying to tell us something about, say, a relationship, it presents proximity and distance as aspects of this relationship, and then inside that contradiction, we come to a different sort of understanding that isn't just present in saying this is right or this is wrong or things of that nature. For example, many of you, at the end here, I read one of them. I'm sorry I didn't make a note of it. It was either David or I think it was David or Dylan. No, I think it was Dylan. Was one of the only people to mention or to question whether or not the father in what Paul in Simulacrum was or committed some unforgivable crime. I think that's an interesting thing. You know, it seems like he's using the Simulacrum to like not cheat on his wife, right? And the daughter seeing that occur is a different kind of trauma. Certainly, her witnessing that is a sort of a traumatic experience. But most of you took for granted or straight up claimed that two differences between these stories is that the mother in Paper Menagerie did nothing wrong and the father in Simulacrum is wrong. I think the end of the story sort of makes us question that. To suggest that Anna was only looking at one little slice of a human being's life story, and therefore missing the point of the complexity of human life, right? So let's think about that too as we move through. When we see moral judgments in these texts, when we make moral judgments of the characters or events in the text, let's question those and see what that does to our own notion of morals and ethics. The whole reason that I read is certainly to expand my own ethical, philosophical notions of human life, of our own historical reality. So while you should certainly bring your own morals and your own judgments to these texts, also stay open and allow literature to change you, because that's what it does when it's at its best and when we're at our best as readers. So keep that in mind. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Make sure that you read your peers' discussion posts. That's what I wanted to say. And read my comments on them, because there's a lot of like literary terms or notions that I want you to have. And I'm having these in individual conversations with your peers. If we were all in a classroom, you would just hear me say these things to your peers and you would write them down in your notes. I would strongly encourage you to do that now. So read through those discussion posts. And I will have more to come on next week's reading and a little primer video. And I owe you some reading quizzes, which I'll post up and I'll make an announcement. So all of that will be clear. All right, gang. Thanks so much for your attention this week. It was great. I'm super excited to continue this journey with you, and I'll see you all soon.